Compliance is an issue that affects small businesses of all shapes and sizes. I know it's not a subject we like to talk about, but it is a subject that we must learn, understand, and even master if possible. The most successful small businesses that I know have someone on their team that helps them with compliance. And I know what you're saying. Hey, Eric, I'm just starting out, right? So again, maybe you're that person. So I want you to pay attention to this upcoming episode with Mr. Jeff Shapiro of CohnReznick. He's got 25 years of experience, worked at Booz Allen, and some of the other organizations supporting government contracting as a compliance auditor. He's going to be interviewed by Randie Ward, who is part of our Govcon Mafia. She's one of the founding members that helped win those $18 million contracts that we won together during the COVID pandemic. So again, I encourage everyone out there, this is an exciting episode. It's not traditional the way that most episodes dealing with compliance tend to be. Jeff is an exciting speaker. Randie asks excellent questions. And so I hope that you can at least take away 3 or 4 nuggets that you can implement into your business tomorrow. That's the idea. Look forward to hearing all the feedback in the comments from everyone below. Welcome, Mr. Jeff Shapiro and Randie Ward.
All right. Good morning, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today on the Govcon Giants podcast. So excited to have you, your expertise and all of your knowledge. We are so looking forward to having this conversation with you today. So Jeff Shapiro, he works for CohnReznick, which is an accounting firm that specializes in GovCon, but other industries from what I have read. Also, they are global, have again, some information about the company. They have about 4,000 team members, 29 offices around the world. And so excited that you guys support locally here and internationally as well. So Jeff, tell me a little bit about yourself. See that you've been an accountant for over 20 years. You are one of the partners at the firm. So I'm sure you didn't get there overnight. So would love to hear a little bit about your story, your journey. How did you end up there?
Yeah, it's quite the winding road. But Randie, first, thank you and Govcon Giants for having me today. I'm really thrilled to speak with you. I love listening to all your stuff. Lots of great folks that you have, and love adding to the many different voices. You know, this Govcon community, we got to attack it all as one. We'll talk about it probably later today, but I'm not only consulting for those working in government contracting, but I'm a government contractor myself here at CohnReznick. So I feel the pain of my customers day in and day out. Anyway, so the story of how I got to be a partner at CohnReznick, like I said, is a little bit of a wild story, but I'll start from the start. I'm a refugee from Arthur Andersen and Enron days. And so, when I first started in working towards my CPA, I was like, oh, great. I get to work for big 5 firms. It's going to be stable. It's going to be great. I'm going to have great career opportunities, and the world was my oyster. And then, about my 3rd year there, the Enron situation started unfolding. I was like, what now? What should I do? So as a young 20-something, I was like, what would be a stable job to go to? So I'm like, how about the federal government? And so, I put my application in, and not too long after the firm was essentially dissolved, I found myself working within the intelligence community and learning what government contracting and contract audit was all about. And embedded within a team, a relatively small team, auditing a whole bunch of different kinds of contracts. Eventually got embedded with contracting officers within there. So I saw the government customer from many different angles, the actual procurement officials, as well as the program officials, how everyone got together and trying to get through all the competitive source selections. While I was in the government, I was the head of a number of cost evaluation teams. So I've been in that war room and, fighting over, whether or not someone should get an award or not. Maybe I'm traumatizing a little bit here, but it was great to be behind the scenes there. So I spent 8.5 years there in the Intel community. And then when I was released to the wild, or I self-released myself to the wild, I worked in industry for a bit. I worked for a couple different companies. I worked as a CFO and compliance director for a growing tech firm. So I've been on the industry side, but then I found myself a great home here at CohnReznick, and I've been here, over 7 years at this point, the last a little more than 4. as partner. And so, yeah, so seeing the experience, being a government contractor, being in the government, helping making decisions, writing the RFPs, the SOWs. I've been a core also within the government.
Oh, wow.
I provide a lot of different perspective here. And then, like I said, here at CohnReznick, we do a significant amount of DCAA style audits on behalf of several large civilian agencies, as well as I consult for companies who do business with other agencies, namely DoD, Intel Community, and others. And so a lot of different perspective I have to lend to you, Randie, and I am happy to answer any and all questions.
Wow. Okay, Jeff. So your bio does not do it justice, of course. So, oh my gosh, I'm like, okay, we've gotten the right person here in the seat for us to ask all of our questions. And like I shared with you, the goal of this particular series that we're doing is that having conversations with small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses, we see that there are so many gaps, right? There's so much ignorance, not like, oh, we just blatantly want to be ignorant, right? There's just so many laws and policies and to keep up with. And so just by default, there's just natural ignorance to what all you need to be aware of. And so we just really want to bring that to our audience to say, hey, are you really looking at this? Are you considering these steps, these policies, this compliance issue? And so that's important for us to continue educating our audience and just being a resource to them. We really appreciate that and being willing to freely give so much to them. And so in light of all of the hats you have worn, okay, the whole being on a cost evaluation selection committee, that is amazing insight. So I probably want to start there, because one of the things we always want to do in business development and capture management more so, we want to get to those people to have those conversations with. It's like, okay, what do I need to be considering when I'm looking at your RFP? Like, how can I be one of those top relevant contractors to you? So why don't you share a little bit about that? I would love to hear your insider tips.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you get yourself in the competitive source selection. It sounds overly basic, but you got to read the RFP, right? How your proposal is going to be evaluated is not a secret. It's all in that RFP. Once you've decided, you read that section C, that statement of work, saying, all right, I will build, we need someone who can build this, that could achieve this velocity, that could reach this target and this place, whatever that SOW says, you say, I could do that. Great, step one. But then you need to make sure you go down and read into that section L and section M. M is where how the evaluation will be done. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be a best value procurement? Is it going to be lowest price technically acceptable? Big difference. If you don't know the difference between LPTA and best value, let's talk about that. And I'm not saying you, Randie, but to anyone else, like you need to understand as a potential government contractor what that means. And LPTA, you literally just have to be good enough with the lowest price and you're going to be selected, even if you have this tremendous value proposition that, oh yeah, my photo taking device can take pictures at this many pixels or whatever it is. But it's like the RFP only said I only need it at this level and you do it that much higher. Who cares? Unless that higher level is that much is cheaper than the person who provides just enough. Yeah. Anyhow. So whether best value, a trade-off analysis, or lowest price, and then what's going to be evaluated? How is it going to be evaluated? Is past performance, technical abilities, security, all these things. You need to go through that and do that true, honest, and candid self-assessment. Like, what can we do? How well will we be viewed in all of these factors? Because sometimes a lot of folks will just propose like, oh, I just need to propose on anything and see what happens. And, I guess that is a strategy. I don't know if I necessarily recommend it, but, if you're looking to win, you need to really take into heart, what those section instructions say. So, in a cost plus, cost reimbursable type situation, when that's going to be evaluated, the cost plus team probably is going to be looking at how realistic are your costs are, how reasonable your costs are, and did you answer all the RFP requirements completely? You can't do that. Again, you're just guessing at what your indirect rates are. All of your estimates are on, engineering estimates. That's going to be really tough to substantiate. And the government's going to take that and be like, I don't know if these guys know what the heck they're doing. And then all of a sudden you'll see the Section M requirement that says, hey, if the offerer doesn't fully explain that they can do this for a realistic price, we have the ability to kick you out of the competitive range. So you'll see that, as frustrating as it can be, especially for newer entrants into the government market, yeah, you got to be a little bit of an oversharer. Convince the government you know what you're doing and how, and demonstrate it. I mean, I see this all the time on the audit side, obviously, but it's very similar in these competitive source selections. You get limited space on the technical side, so you do have to be concise to demonstrate how you can build that widget or deliver that service to the specifications of the SOW. But in the cost side, it's usually unlimited. And for the most part, you should be taking advantage of that to give that confidence to that cost evaluator that you can do what you're building, what you're delivering at the price that you're proposing. Simple as that. Over in as quick as I can talk about it. I didn't want to take up the whole time.
Yeah, I know, because there's so much. So really, over communicate, make sure it's very, very clear you understand the scope, right? And that, like you said, be realistic and reasonable in your price. I know one of the things that a lot of contractors we get frustrated about is the whole LPTA, right? Everybody wants to use LPTA, but wasn't there a ruling or a policy recently that said you really need to shift from LPTA and do more best value?
Yes, correct. There were recent DFARS regulations that told procurement officials, here are certain situations where LPTA really should not be used. I'm not going to try to do that off the top of my head. But yeah, one tip I always give to government contractors, when you see that draft RFP, it's draft. Anything can change. So you see a requirement you're really excited about, think you can deliver excellent value, do something really innovative, and then you go scroll down to the bottom of the RFP and it says LPTA. There is nothing restricting you from putting in a question. Usually there's some kind of Q&A period for almost all our RFPs that are competitive that answer any question. And one of the questions you ask is, why are you doing this LPTA? The government should really consider doing best value, so that answer all the blanks without totally giving your secrets. Because remember, all those questions are going to be able to be read by all potential offers. So don't give all your secrets away in that question, but you want to demonstrate why is it worth it to change this to best value. So don't run away from all LPTA draft requirements. Don't take your filter and say, well, if it's LPTA, I'll never even do it. See if you can put in a question or some other narrative, or reach out and say, hey, can we discuss this? And see if you convince it. A lot of people think that the federal government, is this huge brick wall you can't get through, that you can't have these kinds of discussions. I can't tell you, my 20 plus years of doing this, never has the government been more open to industry feedback, which is a wonderful change lately. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's a lot more accessible. You'll see the contracting officers being on LinkedIn and talking about the problems they're having, interacting at all these various conferences. Recently NCMA had its huge World Congress where contracting officers from both the federal and commercial side all come together. They're all about interaction. They know that this really is a team sport.
Yes.
Protect American interests and do good for the American people here. Like, it shouldn't be done in a vacuum. And so they'll make decisions of what they think is, the best way to procure a certain good or service. It may not be the best way to do it. And to your, I think what point you were almost making there was saying, lot of folks default to LPTA because it's easy.
It's easy.
It is. It is. And sometimes they'll come back and say, you know what? Appreciate your feedback. And maybe if I had more time, I would do this best value, but we need this really sooner than later. And we are okay, getting good enough. I mean, or they'll argue, well, that's why I put the specifications, the thresholds as high as they are. And so as long as you meet those specifications, I think we're okay. So it's interesting to get into that dialogue and understand.
Yes.
And sometimes LPTA really is good. When you have a well-defined scope, it's an exact need, doing something faster, isn't going to make much of a difference for the customer, then there you go. Trust me, there is a time and place for LPTA. Anyways, have that conversation. Know that it's not final until it's final.
And that's a great point, right? Work to shape that requirement as much as you can to make it beneficial to you. I mean, it'll be beneficial to other people as well, but try to shape it as much as you can. Hopefully you shape it where it's like, it's really defined, in your favor. But for the most part, yes. I mean, I've had to do that recently, actually, because an opportunity we're working with someone on is very much LPTA. And I'm like, there are too many unknowns for you guys to utilize LPTA here.
Yikes.
You don't know what type of projects you're going to ask for. You don't have any scopes really narrowed down. You told me you can do any one of these potential things within this IDIQ, but you're telling me LPTA is what we should be okay with. And I'm like, no, no. So, okay, well, thank you. That's great. I'm glad that you're telling them, try to shape it. It's not final just because, especially if it's in a draft form. So that's important.
And heck, even when it gets to final, and if it's something that's so objectionable that you're like, how can you possibly ask that question and be fair about it? You still can send questions even though there's no open period. So as long as you keep sending those questions, you're allowing yourself
to engage with them,
to be able to, you're engaging and showing the customer how interested you are in the opportunity. But God forbid it goes down to this path, like you could protest it, right? And that's a subject for another day. Yes. And I encourage you to talk to my lawyer friends about that topic. But public funds, right? And that's the safety valve that we have to make sure that procurements are done in a fair manner. And so one of those checks and balances is that protest method. And so, you got to ask all those questions. You can't protest something that you didn't try to change until that solicitation was totally final. So you get to that last day when it's due and they still didn't change it, then you're like, all right, get in touch with your lawyer soon enough so you can file that pre-award protest. Because if there's a requirement in that solicitation that you think is you're going to tilt the procurement unfairly. That's a whole discussion for another day, but unfairly tilt it to someone or against you in an unjust way. Yeah, there's a method for you to change it. Anyways, I don't want to derail it.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. They hate protests, right? We don't ever want to do a protest.
That was the Harry Potter Voldemort word in the evaluation rooms.
Oh,
like that was the thing we couldn't talk about. They were all training us, before every procurement, the legal team, along with the contracting officer, would sit down with all the evaluators and say, "Hey, listen, this is what this is all about. This is what you can and can't do. This is so also we can avoid that P word."
That's right. We want to avoid that protest.
We are very, very sensitive to that on the evaluation team. Just so
I know. You hear it, and you hear their conversation. So
Yep.
Okay, so great information so far. What would you say like your successful clients are doing when it comes to their accounting practices or accounting compliance? What do you see that they are doing versus the ones that maybe are not being as successful, or they're coming with a lot of issues? So
so that's a lot of different ways we can go with this. To me, is having good controls, being proactive about it, right? So what does that mean? It means, if you're a small business, you're not going to have a robust accounting department where, multiple people will be able to make sure that no journal entries are, run through without any oversight, or the metrics aren't being closely watched on a month-to-month basis, checking out, what expenses are throwing us off from a profitability standpoint. And that's very generic advice, whether you're in government contracting or not. But at the end of the day, if you're a smaller business, maybe you only have one person running your finance department. If you're a CEO, COO, you need to be active in the financial process. You'll say, oh, but I'm not good with numbers. Oh, but I don't understand accounting. Then have that accountant explain to you what they mean. Ask those questions. You need to be proactive. You need to regularly close your books. I mean, it's a very basic tenet if you're a smaller business, but like every month, close your books within a reasonable period of time after the month is over, so you can be strategic, or actually in this case, more tactical on a month-to-month basis, saying, where are my trends? Where are all my costs going? Am I remaining profitable on a project basis, on a segment basis? If you're a larger business, you need to continually monitor that and see where can you change direction as necessary in order to get the growth that you want. And understanding then the longer term is, if you're a smaller business, are you looking to sell in 5 years, or are you looking to go to IPO in 10 years? You need to have all those goals in mind, whether it's for the short-term financials or the long-term financials. Doing, not only looking at the actuals, do those forecasts. Get those forecasts, knowing that they are going to change. Understand what your waterfall, meaning what your backlog of contracts are looking like, and how those revenues are going to slot in over the next several months, several years even. What does that do for your firm? And then look at your open opportunities. What are your P-wins? Probability of winning certain opportunities, and how does that factor in? What I briefly talked about, a lot of companies love proposing on as many things as possible and hope that something hits. What does that do to your bottom line? What does that do to the people who work on B&P, or do you use a consultant for that? You're sinking all these dollars in. What kind of ROI are you getting on those dollars? So, being proactive, being strategic, understanding what your cash flow is. Geez, I mean, for a small business, when I was working for that small business I briefly mentioned before, like that's where a lot of my focus was. Am I going to be able to make payroll, right?
Yes.
I working with my bankers closely and enabling that line of credit to extend as far as possible, and work with me when timing didn't work out right, or the government didn't quite pay us as quick as we hoped, or whatever it may be. You got to be on top of that too. So there's a lot of different ideas there, Randie, but I think at the end of the day, making sure that you're paying attention, asking questions if you're on the executive side. If you're the actual people in the back office, like, make those numbers mean something. What does it mean that your AR is aging, more than 30 days? If you're a federal government contractor, you shouldn't have much AR that goes past 30 days. What's going on with the government? Like, ask the questions. Go again, be proactive. Be like, hey, prompt pay here, although you need to have a proper invoice in order to get prompt paid within a certain amount of time. What's going on? Why are we not seeing the cash as fast as we should? So there's so many different ways to go there. But yeah, to me, it's all about being proactive, and don't assume because, oh, I've got $10 million in revenue coming, I'm going to do just fine.
Right. And that actually goes to, again, when you think about at the small business level, the ignorance of what accounting really, how important it is, the terminology, how to look at the numbers and analyze them. That's a whole nother language, right? And so there's no excuse as the business owner. We know, like, you have to be in control. You're supposed to be in control. But it's like when you're trying to do 100 other things to actually build the business, that is probably one of the things that's going to fall off, because you're like, I don't even understand what all these terminology means. What am I supposed to be really looking and evaluating? So it's really getting educated and finding courses or whatever you can get your hands on to understand the accounting system.
100%. And when you're in government contracting, understanding the types of contracts that you're bidding on.
Yes.
Are you bidding on FAR Part 12 commercial contracts? Like if that's your purely your business, a lot of the Govcon compliance that I have many clients for, a lot of that falls off. And I don't say that as a bad thing, right? I encourage my clients, hey, listen, go sell your products and services out in public. And so you can come back in government and be like, listen, I sell this publicly. Same exact widget is being sold to this aircraft company, to this, wherever. And I can now sell it to you for that same price because I've competitively sold it multiple times here out in public. I can now sell it to you at this commercial price instead of me worrying about all the various direct costs and overhead costs and G&A costs that went into that good. That's a whole different story. It makes it really fast. And the government, the FAR and all the agency supplements will tell you, we prefer buying commercial goods and services. Why? Because it's easy and fast. Just like going to Walmart, going to Amazon, you click and pay and done, right? This is why GSA has all the mass schedules and all that kind of good stuff. So you can speed up that procurement process. So knowing that you're just chasing after commercial contracts, hey, great. That's a relatively simple, typical commercial business model that'll help you. But if you see that there's opportunities for like R&D or more complex, unknown scope projects, that's likely going to be in the FAR Part 15, contract by negotiation. That's where you're going to have a lot more rules around cost allowability, cost allocation, and then you really have to understand that. So having an accountant that understands those specific GovCon rules, we're now not just talking about GAAP accounting. It's now more understanding specific cost accounting rules for government contractors. And then that is a different language. If your accountant doesn't speak that, you're putting yourself at risk. I'm not one for scare tactics, but you have to understand if that's what you're going, you need to set yourself up so you're ready for that before going and doing it. Figuring it out on the fly, I do not recommend it. When I got into the government, like I said, Randie, it took me a little while, reading that FAR, as exciting of a read as it is, understanding cost accounting standards for the larger business, it takes a while to study and understand. So working with people who have that experience and been through it and successfully submitted claims, entered costs and proposals, whatever it may be within FAR 15 rules, you need to have that on your team.
Yes, absolutely. The whole DCAA, those audits, the indirect and direct costs, like you mentioned, what's allowable, what's not allowable. And I definitely want us to touch base on that. So I'm going to make a note for us to come back to it because that is major. We even talked about that when we first had our initial conversation because I know that is those sideline conversations that happen, but the complexity of it is intimidating. So definitely want to talk about that. But want to finish up on the question I had asked earlier, with the success of what is the large businesses doing really well that the small businesses should take note of? And is it maybe that they're just keeping up with their controls?
Well, don't get me wrong. I have plenty of large business clients that have their share of challenges. Whether it's the large business making acquisitions and integrating those smaller businesses into theirs, making that decision as to whether do I want to run that as a separate subsidiary or do I want to integrate it and only have one set of indirect rates to provide. And those internal controls get more complex. And because you're a large business, don't assume that your internal controls are going to work just fine. You can definitely, there can be lots of end arounds for management manipulation and stuff like that, you need to develop more robust internal controls than what you would do at a smaller business. And so understanding, again, the controls that go in when transactions coming in, and then the overview of, all right, at the end of the month, what do I need to take a look at to make sure that everything operated as intended? And then even the larger scale, at the end of the year, what management review am I doing to make sure that this process is working is. Is that an internal audit? Is that an independent manager? Hey, I'm just going to take a step out. Hey, are people claiming the proper per diem amount? Something silly as that. Or are they using their procurement cards properly? Where is potentially waste going out of the company? Where is fraud potentially happening? Where is the abuse of the funds happening? And so being able to study all that and taking your time when you have that larger business, it gets a little more complex. And I'm not going to say just because you get to a certain threshold in revenue, you automatically you're going to be fine. You're going to have to further develop better or more robust controls, because more dollars coming in the company means more dollars can be leaving your company if not carefully watched. There's plenty of incidents out there, whether it's missed cost allocations that honestly there's been opportunities where companies just missed out on dollars that could have been reimbursed, or they mischarged contracts that they were due more money than what they thought. So there's that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff where it's like not necessarily people literally walking out with the money or an asset, a computer or something else from the warehouse. Sometimes there's just from the claim standpoint that, oh, I didn't realize I could allocate this cost to this contract. Oh, I didn't realize that this certain specific type of marketing is actually an allowable cost. That's actually an opportunity, a myth, sort of like an opportunity cost for the company. So that happens plenty at larger businesses as well, Randie. Let me tell you.
Well, that is comforting, and I see that it's not in the accounting side per se, but on the business development side, where we're supporting companies through Alchemy. We've got small clients and we have large. And you go in thinking, oh, the large, of course, it's going to be so much easier because they have all these systems in place and they've got more people. And
no, that large company dealing business with 105 different subcontractors, and I'll just have the subcontractors record their time in my timekeeping system. Yeah, but do they ever decide to take that timekeeping system on their side and reconcile it to the invoices that those subcontractors were providing? Not all contractors will do that. They'll just assume that it's fine, they'd pay it. And all of a sudden an auditor goes in and does that reconciliation for them and then finds, thousands of hours of difference. What do you think the side they're going to take? If the invoices say they worked 10,000 hours and the timekeeping system that they build off had 20,000 hours, guess what the auditors are going to suggest to the contracting officer as being a proper cost, right? The lower amount. So you better be doing those reconciliations. Anyway, so that's an extreme example, but I've seen something like that. Companies just assumed, terrible thing to do. That's why the phrase trust but verify.
Yes, that is.
That's not the only thing I learned in the intelligence community, but trust, it's very much a phrase within the CPA profession as well. We have to, as auditors, we have to use what's called professional skepticism when it comes to looking at numbers that we're validating on behalf of the client, whether it's for the client itself or whether working for the government, whatever it may be. And so doing those, demonstrating that you're performing the internal control that you say that you're doing, enables us to say, okay,
right,
these things work these internal controls work the way they intended. So yeah, going through that process is critical, and understanding that, especially if you're doing business with the federal government, you have to make the assumption that whatever I'm doing today is going to be looked at by a third-party auditor at some point.
That's a good filter to keep in mind as you continue. Any size company, anything I do today will potentially be looked at by a government official or a government whoever appointed. It could be 5 years down the road or something.
Exactly, and those employees may not be there. So let's talk about that, Randie. Point. You have, the record retention policy is essentially 6 years from when the claim was submitted. So that's a really long time. And I don't know about you, Randie, but I've never heard of any company that's able to guarantee 100% retention of their employees over a 6-year period, heck, a 1-year period, right? So you, as part of those internal controls, again, build in the fact that like, don't have anyone store anything up here, right? You literally need to have a documentation policy. How are you going to store those? What drives are they? Are they sitting on personal drive, or are they sitting on cloud drive? And how are those cloud drives being protected? And don't even get me started, going down the whole cybersecurity and IT security realm. But like, though, talk about important internal controls, I'm going to tell you, any size company better be starting there on the IT and cyber controls. Don't even get me started. My cyber partner would kill me if I didn't mention that. So there you go, it's mentioned.
Yes.
But like, wherever that data is, you need to have it safe and secure. You can't, low risk of being corrupted, so that, or something a disaster strikes, you have that backup. Whatever it may be, you have to demonstrate how you came up to claiming that cost. And so you better have all your ducks in a row when it comes to maintaining that support. Huge deal.
You need to be able to prove everything.
Yep. And trust me, the IRS thinks very similarly. Just saying.
Oh, I know. For sure. Okay, so what keeps your clients up at night?
That's a very wide question there. And
I know, there's 1,000.
It depends where it is. You asked me that a year or two ago, they'd be talking a lot about the PPP loan and whether or not, I had that properly forgiven. And that's been waning down. There's a little bit left about the employee retention credit and whether or not I'm claiming that properly. I'm not going to say that's not going to go away. And then, how to reduce my taxes and, the new rules around R&D, that's a very new problem that's going on. And but if you're in government contracting, what's going to keep you up is, am I maximizing profit? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Most business owners will never not complain about that. Like 15% is not enough for me. 12% is not enough for me. 25% is not enough for me. Like, because they know when they're starting to talk to their M&A advisors and they're looking at their EBITDA and looking at their projections, they're like, why aren't you doing better? Why aren't you more efficient? And so, if you're going to get a higher multiple, you need to have a higher EBITDA. I mean, that's one of the many factors, whether or not you have innovative products and new patents, there's other kinds of things that are up there. But in terms of financial performance, that's going to be a huge deal. So yeah, I get a lot of questions about how can I maximize profitability? How can I get the government to pay me more for what I do? And so, I mean, and that's a commercial world problem too, but especially in this cost reimbursable world, a lot of companies are like, how can I be more competitive? We talked a bit about that earlier. How can I segment my business out? Can I do it to this many segments? And I say, you can, but do you want to have 100 different rates to propose? Or does it make sense? Because the FAR rules, in many ways, especially within that FAR Part 31, which talks about the cost principles and how costs should be allocated to contracts, are very flexible. And so I'm always all about practicable solutions. Like, yes, you can do it this crazy way and, allocate your indirect costs, specifically, or you can allocate it over a different kind of base. There's so many different ways to do that. And that's a good thing that there is a lot of gray within those cost principles. Yes. And so, hey, Jeff, how can I get in on these contracts? How can I get myself more competitive? I get that question a lot. And yeah, you need to look at, now that people are working from home, what have you done with your overhead rate? Do you still maintain offices? Is there excess capacity? How do you manage that? Is your compensation competitive? What do you need to do on that side that won't be questioned down the road, that you maintain a competitive workforce that doesn't turn over, and being able to do that? So how do I develop a compensation system? Whether it's, do I just all across the board increase all my salaries? Or what kind of other fringe benefits can I add on? I can't afford all that. I can't afford to pay my people top, Amazon, Google dollars. What do I do to compete? And I talk about, there's cost-based benefits you can give your employees, whether it's more flexibility on their work schedule, more flexibility on how to use PTO. Have you thought about how employees have a ownership within the company? So many different things you can do to be creative, to be competitive. So going through those conversations, Randie, I've done that many, many, many times, especially I find clients who find themselves in a losing streak and they're just get frustrated. Hey, we've been losing more proposals than not. The such and such company keeps underbidding me. What am I doing wrong? It's not always a cost answer. Sometimes it's programmatic, and I'm very open about that. But ultimately, yeah, there's so many different things keeping folks awake. But there's a sampling.
Oh, and I'm sure there's so many, because there's no one size shoe that fits every company, right? So
correct. Yeah, no, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times I say, well, how does everyone else do this in the industry? And I'll say, listen, I can tell you a client that does something a certain way, but if you do it that way, your company culture will not be able to absorb it, right? Like, I've had certain companies that'll tell me, I'll tell them that the best practice in timekeeping is to do total time accounting. So everyone writes down every single hour that they work, and we assign that to all the various projects, direct and indirect projects. And some companies, when I tell them that's the company best practice, they'll come to me and Jeff and be like, no one wants to do timesheets here. I'm like, okay, what are you going to do about that? Like, do you think you can still pursue these kinds of FAR 15 negotiation contracts? Because you need to demonstrate that your labor costs are being fairly allocated to all those contracts. So what are you going to do? So that's where business decisions need to happen and be like, oh, I got to rethink that. And so now you got to think about doing things purely commercial and or fixed price. So having all those considerations, and because you're in the same industry as ABC company, and that ABC company does certain things one way, may not necessarily fit your company. So I talk about industry best practices all the time. I always couch them in, does that really fit into how you do business? So always keep that in mind. I always throw that out. That has to fit your culture, your processes, your systems.
Yeah.
The famous consultant term is, it depends, right?
So that actually is a really that actually now has got my brain turning here with even your strategy. It changes your strategy if that's the case, right? Because if you have to eliminate a whole section of the FAR, is like, okay, well, our team doesn't want to do this, then you can't go after any of those types of contracts. So what percentage of that you're actually eliminating to help you even be profitable? And it's a whole nother strategy.
Absolutely right. Same thing if you're pursuing grants or other financial assistance. There's so many different ways to do business with the federal government. Everyone sees the Infrastructure Act that put out billions of dollars that DOE is working its tails off to go and spend and give it to states, or do it, spend it themselves. And people and infrastructure firms around the country are like, oh my goodness, I never thought about doing business with the federal government. I'm going to jump right in. And again, knowing the rules, understanding the strings attached. I hate to use these cliches, but you got to understand what you're getting yourself into. And it really is a good deal. And that's why you have trusted advisors who can help walk you through it. But at the end of the day, especially in this example, the infrastructure dollars being used to subsidize R&D, like, would you rather use internal R&D dollars or use taxpayer provided dollars to help incentivize you to build that next generation of energy efficient product, right? Or battery or whatever it may be. It's like, yeah, I'm going to take outside funds if all I have to show is my work on how I use them. Okay, that sounds like a good deal, instead of using my own retained earnings or outside equity in order to do that. So that, to me, is a pretty smart way to get free funds to jumpstart a business line you want to do. There's a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great financing opportunities via the government for you to jumpstart your business, both within the federal sector or non-federal sector. There are plenty of business objectives out there. That the SBIR program, huge goal. The SBIR program is to commercialize ideas.
Yes.
And commercialize, meaning I want the federal government to help you with innovation that not only will help us as the government, but it'll help you as a business, make the blank industry better. Renewable energy, aviation, manufacturing, you name it. Anyways, I get off my soapbox.
No, that's great. It also shows the importance of knowing who you should turn to get solid advice, right? When you are putting together your strategy, it's beyond what you think you know. There's so much you don't know that, you really should engage the experts to help you navigate.
100%.
As much as you may not want to pay, you're like, I don't want to pay that type of cost. But I think, how much more am I saving and how much more am I going to profit by just knowing, like some of what you just said? It's like, who would have probably thought that, if I'm going to read, I probably should read the FAR to help make sure I'm approaching my strategy the right direction, because I may have to eliminate a whole set of opportunities.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
That is gold. That's gold information, right?
But to that point, though, I don't want you, business owner, who has this great idea, to have to memorize and get to know the FAR, right? That should not be your job. Your job should be have awareness. You're here listening to this podcast, hopefully, and be like, great, all right, there's certain rules I need to know about, but let me make sure I get those trusted business advisors, whether from the outside or I hire it in to someone who's gone through the experience and ask those important questions, right? So just have that awareness, be in the community. There's so many different organizations out there where you pay little to nothing to get to understand how to do business successfully with the federal government.
Well, I'm going to come back to that point right there, because it's actually going to help me to round out some other questions.
Sure.
I want to make sure we hit the DCA, that whole audit.
Please, let's talk audit.
Yes. So
come on. There's nothing sexier than audits. Please bring it on.
So where do we start? Right? There is the whole indirect. There's so many DFARs that touch on the DCAA. There's the indirect, there is the direct, there's again, what falls under the indirect, the overhead, the G&A, then you have the labor, like how much you're paying, the wages, the hours, the billing, like you have to be compliant there, and invoicing, like how do you do that, and so I don't know where to start, but I'm sure you've got a lot of information you can share we can make it as precise as we can, right? So, what should they know?
Yeah, for smaller businesses getting into this world of contracting by negotiation, I don't normally recommend things by DCAA, but no, I do. I'm just kidding. DCAA has a publication that's been published for a long time called Information for Contractors. It gives a great primer for understanding what a direct versus indirect cost is, what an allowable versus unallowable cost is. I highly recommend that for anyone new to the federal contracting space, whether you're small, medium, large, anyone that's new to the space. That is a great basic material. Reading, it's about 100 pages long last time I checked, but it actually goes pretty sooner. It goes pretty fast. It gives real life examples. Highly recommend it. And so getting to know that and having that basic understanding by all means. I'll do my quick plug that our firm has a ton of free resources out there.
Okay.
The Govcon 360 site, on the CohnReznick website, we give lots of free webinars and other informational pieces that we write about certain cost allowability. What do you do if you're a commercial business looking to get into the federal sector? What are the things you should think about? There's a lot of free resources out there to educate yourself on what it means to get into this, cost compliance world.
Right. Okay. So if you have a small business, actually, I'll rephrase it. So if a company is looking to do government contracting, they're brand new, don't know, but they have QuickBooks, right? Most companies start with QuickBooks. I know QuickBooks has a DCA where you can do I guess an add-on or something.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. They're bolt-ons. Yep.
Yep. So that you can at least start in that direction. So you can access it through maybe a simpler medium than something more complex.
Mm-hmm.
But as the contractors are thinking about, like we talked about, strategy in that sense, mm-hmm. what type of contracts maybe they should avoid if they're wanting to now get going with a little bit simpler set of accounting requirements versus, hey, we're good, we're a medium or large company, so we probably can handle adding that complexity to what we already are doing. What type of contracts could they go for? You mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm going to be here to say that the accounting software you use as part of your accounting system, an accounting system is people, technology, and processes. You can use a very cheap, I'll use that word, software to manage the most complex government contract out there. Okay. All right. I may not say that's the best idea, but you can, right? And we talked about internal controls before.
Right.
But I'm here to tell you, and again, it depends on the business needs. I'm sorry, I can't, a consultant has to say it depends in sentences. But your investment in software should be in proportion to the risks that you're willing to take on. It's sort of, that's kind of, my thoughts in this case. But you can make QuickBooks work for a whole wide variety of government contracts, and you're fine. You just need a savvy user and have a couple of those bolt-ons to make their lives easier. But ultimately, you could keep your accounting system in Excel if you wanted, or on a freaking sheet of paper, back to the 90s and 80s, right? Seven column paper. I'm almost that old, but and I don't know if I ever audited a system quite like that, but I've seen very basic QuickBooks setups work just fine on cost reimbursable contracts. And there's lots of manual processes. There's lots of downloading into Excel to make those indirect pools if you don't have that bolt on, and then doing your billing, making sure you're monitoring whether or not your billing is within the funding and or contract value limits. Are you taking out certain costs that are not allowed to be billed on a certain contract? That one contract allows G&A to be applied to travel, whereas this other contract does allow it. You gotta, the system, QuickBooks probably won't be able to automate quite everything, but you'll be able to do it manually. But so again, you just need someone who's very well organized and have a process and control to make sure checking it before it goes out. It's all doable. So your investment in enterprise resource planning software, it shouldn't match the risk of what you're willing to take on as a firm. And yeah, as you rapidly grow, you're gonna want to have all this data very automated, and I want to real time, check on my indirect rates, real time check on the profitability at each of my jobs, and maybe if I divide my job into multiple segments within my division, so I can assess the performance of the EVP who supervises the engine manufacturing division as opposed to the navigation division, whatever it may be, the communications division. The stuff gets a lot more complex that you need an enterprise resource planning software that can follow that and help you make the good business decisions moving forward. So hopefully I think I addressed the question that you had on that point.
So so going into a little bit more about the types of, like, what you can and can't do, that was great information. But what types of contracts you think?
So
contracts with
so types of contract, and again, yes, you can maximize, you can make more profit theoretically on fixed price / commercial contracts, right? You put yourself at risk. Although, in this latest inflationary environment, a lot of companies are getting a little scared off, especially if you're, whether it's the labor costs that are skyrocketing or the commodities or the chips, the microchips, or, making sure that those chips are not made in a place that they're not allowed to be made. There are a lot of supply chain risks out there that a lot of companies, they're a little bit scared of fixed price contracting, but they build that price of risk into the pricing. So, understanding how that all works and being strategic about your pricing, huge key, right? So if you're scared about the compliance risks, yeah, you definitely want to lean towards those fixed price / commercial contracts. But cost reimbursable contracting is a lot less risky for contractors, especially if you're doing R&D efforts, especially if you're doing efforts where you're like, I'm not sure where this is going to go. This isn't just a staff augmentation contract where the government needs you to staff a call center, right? You can tell how many people are going to be there based on anticipated call volume. Sure, no problem. But if you're building the next generation of AI to be used for weapon systems, that can go in a lot of different directions.
Yes.
And I hope the government's going to go out there and not procure that fixed price, because I don't know any company that'll be willing to do that on a fixed price basis. So anyway, so to your point, I guess what you're trying to get at is, yeah, the accounting for fixed price contracts is typically a lot more straightforward on fixed price contracts, and you can manage that a little easier. But that's not to say, like, if you still have that project cost accounting, you still want to manage to see, how good of a pricing job did I do up front, so I can learn my lessons. So in the next time I do my pricing.
Better,
so
right.
Even though fixed price contract doesn't necessitate project-based accounting, you may want to enact that anyway, so you can see how well you've been doing on a project basis, not necessarily on a company-wide basis.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. It's very intimidating.
Well, that's why you make friends in the industry, right?
That's why you have
networking. Whether or not you hire me, I'm not offended, but I want you, know that you're not alone in this. There are thousands of, I don't know how many people are in the defense industry base. I used to have that number off the top of my head, but there are tens of thousands of folks working federal government, right? And making sure you're doing that kind of networking, getting out there, talking to folks. Trust me, other businesses will be more than willing to share the ups and downs and tips and tricks. There's a lot of different communities out there willing to have those kinds of discussions.
Yes, and that's why it's so important. Again, I mean, you don't know everything, well, the owner, the contractor, we don't know everything. So we have to surround ourselves with the right resources and not be afraid to build those relationships. So I know we're coming to that end of the hour, and I want to be mindful of your time. But I want to ask you really quickly, how did you see COVID change the shape of contracting when it comes relating to the accounting side?
I mean, obviously COVID changed a lot about, where we worked, how we worked, and certainly changed how we communicated with each other and monitoring it. And, not seeing people in person, from an accounting standpoint, there's a certain amount of challenges to that as well. But, if you're talking in terms of, COVID benefits, or you're talking about just in general, us working from home.
Well, was there any benefits on the accounting side? There were some good that came out of COVID, and there was horrible that came out of COVID, right? So did you see any that was beneficial? I know that in some of the reading I've done, there's the cost came down for overhead, for example, right? And so that led to more profitability for some of the companies. So that's a positive, but then we have inflation. So that's
like I briefly mentioned before, the supply chain, risks like exploded, right? All of a sudden, you couldn't get a whole bunch of things shipped over, whether it's PPE or toilet paper, as we all saw, whatever it was. So I think that if anything, that taught us understanding that supply chain risk, working with those suppliers, like, hey, what can we do to negotiate longer term contracts? So if I need to acquire certain goods, if you're in the manufacturing business, if I need to get these bolts, I know I'm always going to need them for the next 3 years, getting into longer term purchase orders where it's like, all right, I want to lock in the price for all these piece parts longer term. Absolutely. I think a lot of more companies are like, waking up that, maybe we should negotiate this longer term than just the 1 year of our contract. You got a contract with 1 + 5 years, or I have I need to deliver 20 widgets over the span of 3 years. Like, all right, let me start negotiating the price of all the parts that go into that widget, longer term than something more immediate, or I, procure it as needed. A lot of people don't like to maintain inventory. So maybe people are like, oh, maybe I do need to maintain that warehouse to maintain the inventory so I can deliver. So yeah, so
definitely to something.
That's sure is a consideration where companies are taking into account. Price of commodities. That's always been tricky, and how you use derivatives and all these other kinds of things to help do that. But it's been a lot more in focus in many different ways. So yeah, so from that perspective, absolutely. Both supply chain risk, IT risk, to me greatly increased in how you manage an overall company. Whether that affects from an accounting standpoint, yeah, I mean, to some extent. I would say from a Govcon compliance standpoint, I think the whole working from home and what's the overhead cost of having so many people work in this hybrid environment and how you do that, that's a huge change. And like, all right, how do I negotiate those savings? How do I work with my landlord to downsize? Can I sublease to companies who want to share the space with us? Go to that kind of WeWork type kind of situation, create your own WeWork and be like, you know what, I'm willing to share my space with you other company, and we'll come up with an agreement to make sure that none of us are stealing each other's ideas or whatever it is. So there's been a lot of creativity there to reduce the amount of excess capacity space that folks have in these long-term office leases they may have.
Okay, yeah, definitely supply chain for sure. And I'm sure they've learned how to be more creative. So, well, I am very grateful for your time. And the only other thing is, if you have any maybe books or resources as your parting that you would say, like you gave us one already on the DCAA. And I want to make sure I get that right. The information for contractors.
Information for contractors. Yeah. So you go to the DCAA website. They do have a lot more than just that. I'm always, as government contractors, we're always teasing DCAA. The government. There are many ways seen as the enemy to those working the space. But honestly, their job is just their protection and make sure that fraud, waste, and abuse doesn't occur with government funds. It's an important role that they play. I have a number of people in my staff who came from that agency, and they do a lot of important stuff. So I want to be very careful with words there. I have a lot of respect for what they do. And then I would say that, their website has a bunch of great resources. All the audit programs are there. Their contract audit manual is out there. So it shouldn't be a big secret. When you get notified you have a DCAA audit coming in, you can access a lot of, what are they going to do when they come in? What are they going to ask for? What are their expectations? You can do your homework and read into, all right, what are the steps they're going to do within this audit? And you can prepare yourself for those audits very well. So DCAA's website is an excellent source of material. DCMA also has lots of great materials that contractors should be reading up on, especially, with maintaining your purchasing system and property system. And then, I plug my own government contracting website. We talk about strategic pricing. Martha Lindquist has a wonderful book out there for pricing strategies. I've spoke with her a number of times at conferences, and lots of great tips and tricks there. There are lots of other books out there, Randie. But that one off the top of my head, I recently read and really enjoy. But yeah, lots of free resources out there though, otherwise. And you always remember when you're reading, something from DCAA site or our site, you gotta put it in perspective, and that like not all things written may necessarily fit your current situation. So always keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way for us to wrap up. So thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your knowledge, for pouring out. It was just flowing, and we caught as many nuggets as we can along the way. So we are very grateful for your expertise and for sharing what you've shared with us today. So thank you very much. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for the great discussion. I love this kind of stuff.
Awesome. I love having you. It was awesome. I love the free flow. We did great. So thanks.